Hi everyone, welcome to the mental health screencast about anxiety. Anxiety is a really important topic because it's something that's very prevalent in our lives and just in our society in general. And it's really important to understand the difference between having situational anxiety, like let's say before a test you get nervous. This is my sidekick Milo, or generalized anxiety. And that's anxiety that is persistent and it's severe. And there's a big difference between those two. In this screencast, we're also going to talk about the physiological response our body has for anxiety. We're going to talk about some ways to give and receive help and a couple of specific types of anxiety. We're going to get started on that now. What is anxiety and what is the fight or flight response? You may have heard of the fight or flight response before in your biology class, and I think I've mentioned it a couple of times in health. Anxiety is an adaptive reaction, meaning it's something that's evolved in humans over millions of years. And it's the reaction to a perceived threat. So think of our human ancestors running from a lion or being face to face with some sort of predator. And it's meant to protect us. However, we live in a time now where those threats aren't prevalent and we don't have to be worried about being chased by lions. But the physiological response to that perceived threat still remains. So even if it's a minor situation that normally doesn't require worry, we still have that physiological stress response. The characteristics of anxiety are excessive worrying, fear, and stress. And again, regardless of the situation, the person that's experiencing anxiety or has an anxiety disorder will have these physiological responses similar to when our human ancestors were faced with some sort of predator or something, a situation where they needed to stay alive. They needed to decide if they're going to stay and fight or flight means to run away. And the main purpose of it is to quicken our response times, right? Because if you're faced with something dangerous, you don't really have a lot of time to think. So it's a really quick and it's a really intense response. And somebody with anxiety can't really regulate that response. Researchers don't really know what the cause of anxiety is, but biological, psychological, and environmental factors could all play a role. And the nature versus nurture argument is saying that maybe it's biological, or how much of it is biological versus how much of it has to do with the way that you were raised. So, nature, biological, nurture is your environment and the way that you grew up. Does that influence anxiety in some people? And it's hard to say. It's kind of like a chicken and egg question, which came first. Same thing here, nature, nurture, which one is the cause of anxiety? It could be a combination of both. Again, researchers aren't sure the exact cause, but all of these different factors could play a role. A family history of mental health conditions could also be part of the reason that people develop anxiety disorders. They tend to run in families. Some personality factors like perfectionism and being generally tense in situations um, can cause people to develop anxiety disorders. You can see it in people that have certain personality traits, ongoing stressors in life or stressful life events. Physical health problems can also give rise to anxiety disorders or other mental health conditions. A lot of times, anxiety is comorbid with other mental health conditions, and comorbid means that it occurs at the same time. Somebody could have depression and comorbid anxiety disorder on top of it. That's what that term means. Our body responds to anxiety through our nervous system. We have our autonomic nervous system, and it's broken up into two sections, your sympathetic response and your parasympathetic response. Both of those are going to control two responses to stress or restful conditions. The parasympathetic is responsible for rest and digest, and that's like our normal physiological functions, like digesting food, breathing normally, regulated regulated heart rate, and the sympathetic branch is responsible for the stress response. That's the fight or flight response. And the way that I can remember the difference between the two is I think I am sympathetic toward people with anxiety or mental health disorders. And that way you can associate anxiety with sympathetic. So, sympathetic nervous system anxiety. That's just how I remember it. In this next slide, we're looking at the response on the body. In the parasympathetic nervous system, when it's activated, this is your rest and digest. This is just normal functions. You increase saliva production for digestion. Your heart rate is decreased, it's lowered, it's at its normal heart rate. Dilates your blood vessels, constricts your bronchi, which helps with breathing. Increases stomach and intestine motility, again, digestion, contracts your bladder. And the fight or flight response is going to be kind of like the opposite of all that. This is your stress response. So your pupils are going to dilate so you're able to see and focus your vision on something. Decrease saliva production because when you're in a stressful state, things like digestion aren't really that important. It's not a top priority. The top priority is keeping you alive. Constricts blood vessels, increases blood pressure, dilates the bronchi to let more air into the lungs, increases blood flow to skeletal muscles, and that way you have more energy and oxygen to your muscles to be able to run away or fight or whatever you're going to do. Reduces stomach and intestine motility. Again, digestion isn't a priority here. Releases glucose from the liver to increase blood sugar to give you a burst of energy. Stimulates your adrenal glands and releases hormones like adrenaline in order to, and that's why you get that adrenaline rush when you're in a stressful situation. Your adrenal glands are going to release that hormone. And then, yeah, so it's more functions that functions are activated that are directly related to survival. And then here's another image of that, just going through each part of the body and showing what physiological responses are responsible when the fight or flight response is activated. A question you may see: if we all get anxiety, is anxiety really a mental illness? We all experience situational anxiety, say before your driver's test or before a test at school or before you give a presentation, anything like that, right? Those are stressful situations. So if that's the case, how can we say anxiety is a mental illness? We all experience it. Well, the difference is anxiety disorders are a group of mental illnesses that the anxiety is so severe and pervasive that it prevents that person from carrying out life normally. It's so disruptive to them that they can't fully engage in everyday life. And it's when this anxiety is experienced on a regular basis and not just from stressful stimuli. The difference is just situational anxiety is when there's something to be stressed about and that person will get stressed out, and that's situational anxiety versus generalized where this anxiety is occurring all the time. And another thing I want to point out about anxiety is that it's not all bad. It's actually a normal stress response to situations in life. And without it, we wouldn't, like, it would be like you would see a wild animal and you'd be like, oh, cool, that's awesome, right? The anxiety or the fight or flight response is going to be able to give us the ability to react quickly and adapt to our environment. It's a really helpful evolutionary mechanism in order to increase our chances for survival. So it is really important. It's like a built-in warning system for us. Hey, something's not right. We need to do something about it. However, again, it becomes a problem when that reaction is just constant. It's not in the response to a stressful stimuli. It's just all the time. That's when it can become an issue. But again, it's not an issue when it is used for our survival. Anxiety can provide motivation. If we didn't have any sort of stressful situation, then we may not get certain things done. A little bit of stress is motivating, actually. And anxiousness may allow people to be more empathetic in their relationships, meaning they're going to think about how their actions affect people. And they're going to think about how other people are feeling about certain situations. And anxiety may be a trait in leadership roles for a similar reason. That person is going to think through things. These are all when anxiety is at a lower level. Think of it like a glass of water. This is like when anxiety is like you have a little bit of it and it's going to cause you to react in situations as you should. However, if a person has a full glass of water and that's anxiety and they have a full glass of water, all this anxiety all the time, that's when it is a disorder. Generalized anxiety disorder is a specific type of anxiety. It's the most common anxiety disorder in childhood and adolescence. The person who's suffering with this worries frequently about minor things or situation. They may appear stressed out most of the time. People with generalized anxiety disorder anticipate disaster. They're overly concerned with general life events. They're very doom or gloom, worst case scenario type thinking, and they can't control this. They can't control their worry. Obsessive compulsive disorder is also another type of anxiety disorder, and it's which people have recurring unwanted thoughts known as intrusive thoughts. And they can also have intrusive sensations, and those are known as obsessions. Those obsessions are running in their head all the time, and it makes them feel driven to do something repetitively. A lot of times, people with obsessive compulsive disorder like patterns. So, because they have these obsessive thoughts, these intrusive thoughts, they want to do things a certain way or a certain number of times. These behaviors, if the OCD is centered around germs, can result in excessive hand washing. So that would be that person's compulsion. It could be checking things a fixed number of times. It can be obsessive cleaning, obsessive organizing, and OCD is much more than being a clean or organized person. If you like things a certain way, that's normal. It's normal for humans to like patterns. But obsessive compulsive disorder is a lot more than that. It's these obsessive thoughts and these compulsions that are driving people to do things that aren't necessary. And a lot of times they know that it's not necessary, but the voices in their head are telling them that they have to do it or else something bad will happen. So again, it's more than just liking things a certain way. And I want to make that a point because I think that's something that's said a lot. That's triggering my OCD because something is a little bit out of line over there. That's not really OCD. OCD is a lot more than that. These obsessive and intrusive thoughts are debilitating a lot of times and they interfere with a person's normal life. Some other types of anxiety: PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. This is anxiety in response to a very stressful and traumatic stimuli that happened in a person's life. And separation anxiety, anxiety when the person is left alone. Selective mutism is where the person cannot speak in certain settings or situation. Phobias, fear of certain things. There's lots of different phobias out there. Arachnophobia, fear of spiders, fear of heights. I don't know what the technical term for that one is. Agoraphobia is the fear of leaving one's home, and substance abuse anxiety disorder. So those are just a couple of the different types of anxiety disorders. And what's the difference between anxiety and panic attacks? I think sometimes these two terms are used interchangeably. Anxiety attacks are usually experienced over a longer period of time. The symptoms include muscle tension, disturbed sleep, difficulty concentrating, fatigue, and restlessness. And there's a lot of others that could be symptoms of anxiety attacks. It really depends on the person. But again, this happens over a longer period of time, where a panic attack is more severe and it's quicker, it's right now. So quicker and more intense. Symptoms include shaking, chest pain or discomfort, heart palpitations, fear of dying or losing control. It's so severe that the person fears dying, feeling of choking because your breathing is compromised, these really short, shallow breaths. And there can be a lot of other symptoms of panic attacks as well. We're going to pick up talking about anxiety in the next screencast, so stay tuned.